Just moments ago, the Senate passed a package of 4 bills to provide billions in foreign aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Those bills are now headed to President Joe Biden's desk for his signature. They received bipartisan support tonight, but this final passage only happened because House Democrats bailed out Republican Speaker Mike Johnson last weekend. Joining me now to talk about all that is Claire McCaskill, former U.S. Senator from the great state of Missouri. Claire, thank you for joining me here. And I kind of wonder, is this a moment? I mean, there have been a lot of conflicting headlines about who deserves credit here. Quite obviously, Democrats do for bailing out the Republican Speaker of the House and members of his own party, getting it through the Rules Committee and out of the House. But do you think Mike Johnson deserves credit? Does he get a gold star for bucking the hardliners in the Republican conference?
I may choke a little when I say this, but probably. He got the high-level intel briefings. He listened to the commanders. I think he spent some time talking with people in Europe who he knows are our allies. And I think he figured out that he didn't want to be with Putin at this moment. He didn't want to be the American who allowed Putin to roll over a democracy. And that it was very dangerous for our country and would end up costing our country even more, not just in money, but maybe even in lives sacrificed in a much bigger and broader conflict. So, yeah, he gets a gold star, but there's gold stars other places. I got to give kind of a gold star. I'm going to choke again to Mitch McConnell because he didn't give up. He actually got more Republicans to vote for the Ukraine aid tonight than he did back in February. He got the majority of his caucus tonight. He did not get them back in February. And frankly, Chuck Schumer is not getting enough credit for keeping, he has the same margin, Alex, as the Republicans have in the House.
Yes.
He only has 51.
He only has a margin. So important to point that out. Well, that's how one party manages a one-seat majority.
Exactly. And look how many times he's kept the Democrats together when it really mattered. And we have a lot of different opinions in our party right now, especially when it comes to the conflict, the horrific war in Gaza right now. So, I think the leaders writ large in Congress get gold stars tonight, even though I grudgingly give it out to Mitch McConnell and Mike Johnson.
Well, listen, I don't think you're wrong to be begrudging in your gold star distribution, just because it feels like Johnson's desire to pass this Ukraine aid bill was based on intelligence and sort of a substantive, a real feeling about the preservation of democracy. And yet it's hard to imagine that he's really making that case to his party as the war in Ukraine goes on, or as he talks about the sort of general foreign policy position of the Republican Party. I mean, it doesn't feel like he's going to use this as a moment to lead and to bring his party back from the hinterlands of isolationism, when quite clearly he believes that's what's necessary for the betterment of the global order.
Yeah, but contrast him with who I think needs a dunce cap in the corner. Like put this in your pipe and smoke it. Marco Rubio voted no today. Marco Rubio is the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee in the United States Senate. Nobody has more intelligence than Marco Rubio, but he doesn't have the intelligence to go with it or the backbone. So it is really interesting that he is siding with Trump in this, even though he knows better. And so did another 16 or 17 Republicans in the Senate and a whole boatload of them in the House. So this is really about, are you with Trump and Putin, or are you with really national security and protecting democracies and freedom across the globe?
Are you drawing a larger inference about what this might suggest in terms of House leadership? I mean, do you think that this means Mike Johnson's ready to do deals with moderate Democrats and sort of move things forward here, or is this a one-time thing?
Well, I don't know. I don't think much will move now. I mean, he's still got to keep the government funded. And so that might be another power move he's going to have to try to make. I think he knows he is on very, very thin ice right now, because the far right crazy caucus is so angry. But, it could be worse. He could be running for the Senate in Arizona and not even know how he feels about an issue that I think doesn't lend itself to flip-flopping very easily. And that is our star out in Arizona, Carrie Lake, who can't decide who she is or why she's running.
Yeah, well, I feel like her inability to take a position on this is so exemplary of a party that really knows better, but is not listening to they're not listening to their brains, they're not listening to their better angels, and they're not listening to the information.
They're listening to the loudest voices. She flipped again because the loud voices are screaming at her. You cannot be against this bill from the 1800s. You must be for this bill. And, you know, the bill isn't even in effect yet. It will be in come summer, it will be. And local prosecutors still have the ability to bring cases. So she's not even accurate when she says that it can't be enforced or won't be enforced. What she is somebody who thinks if she talks really, I mean, she's so telegenic and she's got that flawless makeup and she gets the really soft shots and she says it all so clearly. She actually believes that people will buy whatever she's selling, and they don't see that she has no principle on this issue. And there's one thing that people hate more than somebody who disagrees with them on an issue like this. That's someone who has no principles on an issue like this. She loses votes from both sides.
I'll just say, I think you're telegenic and I love your shot. And I can see a cake in the background, which makes me love it.
Oh, it's scones. It's scones. It's
even
blueberry scones. I'd get you a cup of hot tea if you were here and we'd have a scone.
I mean, give me the ticket. Claire McCaskill, thank you for joining. Thank you and your blueberry scones for joining me tonight for some real talk. I appreciate it. In May of 2016, you could find this bombshell on newsstands and at the supermarket checkout in your local grocer. It was everywhere. Ted Cruz's father linked to JFK assassination. Top U.S. spy exposes presidential race bombshell. The blood, the mission, the blood money, the mission, and the cover-up. Though there was blood, too. That was the cover of the National Enquirer, alleging that the father of Senator Ted Cruz had been handing out communist propaganda with Lee Harvey Oswald a few months before Oswald killed JFK, which could only mean that Ted Cruz's father was somehow involved with John F. Kennedy's assassination. It was a stretch. But at the time, Trump was running against Cruz for the Republican presidential nomination. Now, Trump was already well on his way to becoming the party's nominee, but Ted Cruz was still hanging on, and he was refusing to leave the race, much to Trump's vexation. And once the Enquirer came out with the conspiracy involving Cruz's dad, Donald Trump wasted no time promoting it. By the morning of May 3rd, Trump was calling in to his favorite morning show.
His father was with Lee Harvey Oswald prior to Oswald's being, shot. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous.
By the end of that day, May 3rd, Ted Cruz had dropped out of the presidential race. But not before responding to Trump's allegations.
You know, Donald's source for this is the National Enquirer. The National Enquirer is tabloid trash, but it's run by his good friend David Pecker, the CEO, who's endorsed Donald Trump. And so the National Enquirer has become his hit piece that he uses to smear anybody and everybody.
The National Enquirer has become Trump's hit piece that he uses to smear anybody and everybody. 8 years ago, the transactional relationship between Donald Trump and the National Enquirer was so obvious that Ted Cruz was just talking about it on the campaign trail. Now, today was the second day of witness testimony in the first criminal trial of a former president, Donald Trump. And the focus of the testimony was that very same thing that Ted Cruz highlighted 8 years ago, the ways in which the National Enquirer helped Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign. David Pecker, the former CEO of the Enquirer, testified that his tabloid would run negative stories about each of Donald Trump's primary opponents whenever they started to do well in the polls against Trump. Stories like, bungling surgeon Ben Carson left sponge in patient's brain. That came out right after a poll that showed Ben Carson leading Trump for the first time. Ben Carson denies that sponge allegation, by the way. And then there was shocking claims. Pervy Ted Cruz caught cheating with 5 secret mistresses. That came out right after a series of polls found Ted Cruz pulling ahead of Donald Trump. What was going down here wasn't even subtle. Trump was using the National Enquirer to smear his opponents and to undermine their candidacies. And the Enquirer was more than willing to oblige. In court today, this is how Mr. Pecker described that process. Pecker: Michael Cohen would call me and say, we would like for you to run a negative article on, let's say, for argument's sake, on Ted Cruz. Then he would send me information about Ted Cruz or Ben Carson or about Marco Rubio. That was the basis of our story, and then we would embellish it from there. Prosecutor Steinglass: you said that Michael Cohen would call you periodically and say, we would like you to run a negative story about this political opponent or that political opponent. Is that correct? Pecker: yes. Steinglass: who did you understand we to be referring to? Pecker: Michael Cohen always told me that he was not part of the campaign, so I only assumed that he was talking to Mr. Trump. When he said we, I thought he was talking about himself and Mr. Trump. David Pecker and the National Enquirer were, by his own admission, publicly influencing the 2016 election on behalf of Donald Trump at the direction of his lawyer. And then there was what prosecutors allege Pecker was doing behind the scenes to help Trump's campaign. Today, prosecutors asked Mr. Pecker about two negative stories about Donald Trump, stories the National Enquirer purchased the exclusive rights to and then sat on so that the accusations against Trump would not come out before the election, a process that is now known colloquially and publicly as catch and kill. The first of these involved a doorman who alleged Trump had fathered a love child with a housekeeper at Trump Tower. It was a story that the Enquirer determined untrue, but bought anyway so that it couldn't be sold to anyone else. Then there was Karen McDougal, the model and actress who, like Stormy Daniels, alleged she had an affair with Donald Trump. The Enquirer also bought the rights to her story so that she could not go public with it. And what we learned in court today is that all of this behind-the-scenes maneuvering, much like those bombshell cover stories, was for one express purpose: to help the Trump campaign. Here's Prosecutor Steinglass. Now, that part of the deal where you were going to notify them so they could buy up negative information about Mr. Trump, did that part help the National Enquirer at all? How was that going to boost sales at the National Enquirer? Pecker: no, that didn't help. Steinglass: that part doesn't have a mutual benefit. The purpose of that component was to benefit the campaign. Am I understanding you right? Pecker: that is right. The focus on how all of this benefited the Trump campaign is important, because the prosecution's central argument in this case, the reason they were able to charge Donald Trump with a felony, is because they say Trump's hush money scheme was all about trying to cover up his criminal activity related to the 2016 election. Prosecutors today revealed that they are planning to rely on Section 17152 of the New York Criminal Code, which prohibits any two or more persons from conspiring to promote or prevent the election of any person to a public office by unlawful means. And so it is important that Trump's arrangement with the National Enquirer and subsequent hush money payments wasn't just about helping Trump, the man. It was about helping Trump, the candidate, win the election. The sixth day of Donald Trump's hush money trial began with a contempt hearing to determine whether the former president should be fined for attacking witnesses on social media in direct violation of a gag order imposed by Judge Juan Merchan. Prosecutors opened the hearing asking the judge to impose the maximum fine of $1,000 for each of the 10 alleged violations. They also asked Judge Merchan to warn Trump about the possibility of jail time. This is Prosecutor Chris Conroy. We are not yet seeking an incarceratory penalty. The defendant seems to be angling for that. Conroy added that the court should warn the defendant that this conduct will not be tolerated and remind him that incarceration is an option should it be necessary. This was the response from Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche. There was absolutely no willful violation of the gag order in the 10 posts that the prosecution just discussed. Those comments were in direct response to comments made by these witnesses, not about these criminal proceedings, Your Honor. When Judge Merchan pressed Mr. Blanche on what specific attacks Trump was responding to, Blanche struggled to answer, which led the judge to say, I've asked you 8 or 9 times to show me the exact posts that Trump was responding to, and you have been unable to do that even once. Blanche's response, President Trump is being very careful to comply with your honor's rules. Judge Merchan, you, Mr. Blanche, you are losing all credibility. I have to tell you that right now. Joining me now, Duncan Levin, former assistant U.S. attorney with the Manhattan DA's office, and Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Alabama. Thank you both for being here. Joyce, what are the implications of losing the confidence of the judge in like 48 hours?
So, yeah, I mean, it's never a good thing, right, Alex? I think that we're all trying to find different ways to express the fact that this is the worst development for Donald Trump's lawyers this early in the trial, and their client has forced it upon them. If Donald Trump were a normal defendant, his lawyers would have taken him out of the courtroom, sat him down, and had a meeting with him where they would have said to him, we cannot defend you if you continue to do this. They may well have had that conversation because Trump's posts on Truth Social tonight have involved attacks on the judge, attacks on Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, but he seems to have stopped talking, at least for the moment, about witnesses. But frankly, it's too late. The judge, I think, is slow to anger. This is a very good judge, a judge who has good control in the courtroom. The fact that he had this level of response to Todd Blanche's attempt to justify Trump's conduct does not bode well for the defense going forward.
Yeah, what does it say about the defense's broader strategy here? We knew this gag order hearing was coming, and this is the best the defense could come up with. Donald Trump is trying really hard to obey your orders when quite obviously he's not.
Well, I don't think they're arguing to the judge as much as they're putting on a show for their own client. I mean, they're making an argument that is not an argument that they know is the winning argument, and this could not have gone any worse for them today, and they had to expect that. If they really wanted to win the argument, they would have said, you know, he went past the line or went up to the line and he's sorry and he won't do it again, and it would have ended right there. But he's making this argument, which is a political argument, and I think as a result of it, this notion of losing credibility with the judge this early in the case is a serious problem, and it's costing them in real-world ways. For example, they're not getting to see who the next witness is for the next day, and that's the kind of preparation that lawyers do when they're on trial. They spend all night prepping for the next day's witness. If they don't know who it is, that's the kind of thing that's going to trip them up and really harm Mr. Trump at the end of the day.
You know, I was also struck, as I know many people were, Joyce, about the contention from the prosecution that Donald Trump is angling maybe to be incarcerated here. Can you talk to that and how feasible that suggestion sounds to you?
Right. So, you know, with Donald Trump, who fundraises every time a judge rules against him, every time he's indicted, I think we can't reject that notion out of hand. The reality of Donald Trump losing even more control, you know, he's struggling to stay in a courtroom without standing up and trying to leave, complaining about the temperature. I think even a brief stay in one of the holding cells in the courthouse would be very difficult for him. Nonetheless, there may be some political appeal to him. His base, you know, there have not exactly been large supportive rallies for him outside of the courthouse. Perhaps this would be something that he would view as rallying the base. But the reality is that for so many Americans who have Trump fatigue at this point, the spectacle of watching the former president go into custody might finally be that bridge too far.
Yeah, I'm with Joyce on the utility of, you know, an hour or two in a holding cell for Donald Trump as a matter of stoking political grievance. But I don't know. That just seems like a very, very difficult decision for the judge to make.
Well, I think what's much more likely to happen is that the judge is going to impose the fine that the prosecutors are going to ask for. Remember, $1,000 is the maximum that he can get. It's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket for him, obviously. So I think that $1,000 fine for him is worth $1 million ad that he could put on TV. What he could do fundraising off of $1,000 fine from Judge Merchan in this case to say that he is being silenced and fined fined, and they are trying to suppress his right to speak, and they don't want him to become president. He is going to use this for all it's worth. So I think whether it's a few hours in a holding cell or a few $1,000s fine, I think he is going to use this for all it's worth. And I think that's the reason you're seeing more posts coming out tonight. He's angling for a fight. He is not shying away from it. And he's basically putting the judge in a corner where there's really nothing else that he can do.